Hello to everybody. I'm exhausted. I'm still exhausted. And tomorrow I will have been home a week. I spent much of that time having naps. So but I have a subject today that I've been contemplating for a long time. I don't really know how shareable it is. It's one of those subjects that some people know a lot about, not so much. Some don't care, but it's a transient kind of subject. It's one of those things that we encounter in our spiritual lives as we are passing through one phase to another phase. So because I know that it's transient, I haven't thought it maybe needed to be discussed at any level. However, I reread a book. It's Teresa of Avila's The Interior Life. Now, this particular one that I have also includes a a study guide. Interesting thing about the study guide is they call it an image study guide, and we've talked about images. So why they call it that, I think that what they're saying is if you consider this in your mind, if you picture what Teresa says, it's more profitable for you. I love Teresa. She's my very most favorite saint, if it's possible to have a favorite saint. But she's favorite in some very particular things for me. She's my favorite because of what she's done and what she thinks about it. And so if anyone says that Teresa of Avila said this, well, then I don't even bother looking things up. I just, if Teresa said it, then, it's got to be so. That could be flawed thinking, but that's how much I trust her. She always comes with an imprimatur. This book is no exception. Imprimatur means that it has permission to be published, and that permission is through the Catholic Church, and it says then that the imprimatur verifies there is no conflict in the information in accordance to what the Catholic Church teaches. So for me to trust anything that Teresa would say is not really nonsense. All books do not come with imprimaturs. I assure you, Teresa always will. I've never, ever seen a book claimed to have the writings of Teresa of Avila, and it did not have an imprimatur. Okay. Now remember, what I'm giving you is a transient thing that occurs through the phases of your spiritual life. That means then some of us experience these things. Some of us don't. Some of us experience some things, and some of us experience others. Whether any of those things happen, it's not a criteria to your holiness. Why God does that, in my experience, is He wants to get our attention. That's how I have interpreted this. When I know that anytime anything has happened to me, it's because God wanted my attention, because I was doing something amiss or doing nothing. And it keeps you from being lukewarm, because you never forget it. You never forget these little touches, these, I call them embraces, that God gives you to encounter Himself with you. You never forget them, because they're unique. They are for you only. They're very personal. You can share them for the benefit of others, but only you will get them. All right, here we go. Teresa of Avila, because she was Mother Superior in a convent, she saw this happen, these things happen, time and time again. She was born in 1515, so it was through that 1500s when her life was going on. What we're speaking of here is not something, though, that happens in the 1500s. It happens all through the history of the church. She's talking about signal graces. Oh, before I get into that, I almost forgot. I have to tell you that I don't have access to Father Lipka anymore. He promised us that he wanted to be a part of our YouTube, and I haven't been able to get him because he was transferred. So I've had to just kind of check him off. I'm trying to find someone else that we can get to do that. But at this time, I don't have a priest for us. Okay, moving on. Signal graces are also known as signs. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew culture called them signs. The non-spiritual world calls it coincidences in our daily world. It's also providence or consolations. All of those things are really the same thing. They're all signal graces. My experience is when I deal with people, all humanity experiences some kind of signal graces. We all do. Our awareness of them vary greatly, as some of us are not aware of it at all. That's why the word coincidence comes up, because in the non-spiritual world, they have to have a word for this thing that seems to happen at the same time that accidentally something else is happening. And so they call it coincidence. In the life of the Spirit, we know better. We know that God actually interjects that. It's an encounter with God. We know that that's what that is. Signal graces, the first time I ever heard that term, I was already Catholic, and it came from, I was reading a book. De Montfort had written it. He wrote several little books. He wrote one on the Rosary and the Blessed Mother, and one of the promises of saying the Rosary repeatedly was that the Blessed Mother promised us that we would have signal graces. It was one of the promises. There's several, but that was one of them. I particularly noticed that one. I can't tell you why. I think I noticed it because as a child, my mother had told me there's no such thing as coincidence. There's no such thing. She also said, but there is providence. So what she was telling me, she was using a Christian word to explain something that in Catholicism they had a little bit more selective term for. Because providence is the same thing also. When something happens in your mind and you're considering something is going on, say some crisis is happening in a family member, and you think, how is that going to be resolved? That's troubling you. And you open a book at a particular place, and voila, it's exactly the same subject that you've been pondering. Or you go to Mass, or if you're not a Catholic, you go to church, and what do you know? The homily's on the very same thing that it's been creating all this anguish within you. That is a signal grace. The difference for a Catholic and a non-Catholic in this matter of signal graces isn't whether they have them at all or not, because they both do. The difference is the Blessed Mother promises us as Catholics that we will have them. That's a promise. It's a promise. All mankind doesn't acknowledge the promise. So you can be sure when something happens to you on the outside of you to get your attention for something that you're pondering inside of you, this is a signal grace. Okay, I have to follow this along so I don't get confused here. There's many kinds of signs, signal graces, whichever term you like to use. As I just spoke about, the one that everyone gets, I mean, literally everyone, because there's no stipulation on what you have to do or be. You don't have to be holy. You don't have to be anything to get the kind where something is troubling you, and you open a book, or you walk into a meeting or a church or whatever. That doesn't say, oh my gosh, I'm more holy than somebody else. It doesn't mean that at all. It's nothing. It's God getting your attention. But there's so many other kinds. There's also signal graces here that, and I'm getting much of this from Teresa, from The Interior Life, or I'm sorry, The Interior Castle, the book by Teresa of Avila. One of the kinds is the first room or the first mansion in the Interior Castle that Teresa of Avila addresses. She says it has to be entered by meditation and prayer. In that first room, you can experience colors, halos, words can leap off your page. You have a flooding of knowledgeable thoughts that you've never been acquainted with. You have a new understanding of something that you never had before. And she noticed that women came to the convent. Now remember, this is in the 1500s, and a lot of people were isolated. Communication wasn't good. So God appealed to them and got their attention to select them so they would feel selected in some way through signal graces. So a woman who's a young woman, she's working in the fields, and she's trying to get signal graces. And she's saying to herself, oh, I'm being called to God to something, but I don't know what. So what does she do? She's going to start looking around in the nearby area to see if there's a convent, because she thinks the first thing they're going to think of is they're probably being called to religious life. That's a first thing. So they would show up at the convent door, and Teresa, being the tough chick she wasn't going to reject anyone, but she was going to watch this as it developed. Now, Teresa herself had many kinds of different signal graces, so she understood what was going on. She didn't have all of the same signal graces that many of these women did, but she knew what a signal grace was. And she also knew it was God getting their attention. So what she had to decipher was, were they supposed to stay there, or was God asking them for something else? And she was willing to invest her time in these young women, because it was her job. Because she knew she was called to do that. So, Now, she's got these young women who are motivated by signal graces, and she's saying to them, now remember, you have experienced what you have through meditation and prayer. You are at the first room in the interior castle. She called it the interior castle, and that term is what we are calling the interior life. I think to call it the interior castle is lovely. It's very descriptive. It certainly was descriptive for the 1500s. For us, the interior life, I think, suffices simply because we know well what that term actually means. So they came motivated by these signal graces. And what Teresa noticed was that some of these nuns were so content with these consolations. Incidentally, that's another word for the same thing. A signal grace is a consolation from God. They were so content with it because it gave them that I'm being selected, or I have a particular grace that my friend nun doesn't have, which is probably true. So they didn't want to leave that, because the contentment they derived from the confidence within that kept them at this place in their interior life. Teresa says this is a flaw. It's a flaw because you choose to stay in that room or mansion of signal graces and you make little progress. Or you make no progress to oneness with God. She considered this to be a situation of pridefulness. One of the reasons that created a problem for these nuns to move from this transient phase into that next room was now they're being called to be closer to God, because signal graces are not oneness with God. Signal graces are the tool that we use to have oneness with God. We are still called to be saints with God for Him. We're still called to be that. And remain in this area in our souls that's transient keeps us from knowing the fullness of the love of Jesus Christ. So then, we have to move beyond that. And to move beyond it, you had to embrace the cross, which for a woman in a Reformed Carmelite convent, probably meant an aridity. An aridity means that you feel like you've been abandoned. There's nothing seems to be working, or it creates a kind of aloneness. That's an obstacle for people who are accustomed and have come using consolations. Who wants to do that? Nobody wants to suddenly say, oh, I'm going to trade all my consolations in for this aridity, whatever little cross that they may be encountering. But it has to be done to make progress, to have union with God. So we have to move on from it. Now, the irony to this is that this doesn't mean you never have another signal grace. It probably means you're going to have a different kind. This different kind that you get doesn't mean that it's going to be something that's so visible. Initially, it is. Let me see. I can give you an example. Liturgically, different times of the year, the church has different colors. And they mean very different things. Advent, you're going to see maroon. And then, of course, ordinary time, you see green. Lent, you're going to see purple. So, as you unfold yourself into these liturgical times of the year of the church, these colors embed themselves within the soul. It becomes recognizable. Your soul knows the truth about these things. The soul, whenever it sees purple, it says, oh yes, we're in Lent. It doesn't have to see purple in the church. Don't forget, God created the entire world. He didn't just create the church. So what a color means in one place is not exclusive. So if I say that purple, I'm in Lent, and it's a time of purple, and I go out and I go shopping and I see a dress that I really would like, but it's probably a little pricey, and what do you know? It's purple. I have a right to say to myself, this is probably not what I should be buying. It's going to be a risk. Maybe I really can't afford it. Maybe it isn't really made well and it's going to fall apart. Maybe it isn't even going to fit me very well. Maybe it doesn't even go with anything I have at home. But it's not something that you're going to know immediately. Unless, of course, you buy the thing. But I say to you, purple is the sign. No. So this is that's an example. That's an example. So you move on from that. Now this is a step closer from having something in your mind and then going to Mass and saying, ooh, they're talking about exactly what I was thinking about. Because now you're a step closer. So now you're using the liturgical colors in the church. So now you're just a little closer. So you moved on from the kind of signal graces that I say is just a tap on the shoulder, where what is in your mind and what you suddenly hear or read goes with that. It's just a little closer. So now, will you still get that other kind of signal grace where things are going to come to you and they're going to be exactly what the Mass is talking about? Will those things still happen to you? Yes, they just won't be so significant for you because you've just kind of moved on. And yes, and they will still be important, but it's kind of like you kind of outgrow it. This is what happens in signal graces. Coming to God, that pathway is a transient thing, and you outgrow the path. I don't think, this has been my experience anyway, I don't think we can make a sign that we had way back in the beginning. I don't think we can make that invisible so that we no longer ever can ever see that particular type of sign again. I don't think that really happens, but we do it anyway. And we do it because we choose to progress in the sacraments. And in progressing in the sacraments, we actually are progressing in self-knowledge. And God comes to us differently as we accept Him and embrace Him in each thing He presents to us. So it actually does, it's a matter of openness. It really is. Now, I know that. I'm saying all of this to you, and I know that's true. But don't think for a moment that I don't suffer or struggle with the same crisis. Moving from this transient phase, I struggle with this the same as any other person would. I'm not giving you this information because I already know how to resolve it and it's been resolved. I don't think it's ever resolved. I think until the day when we say hello to God, I think we go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. But they're all different. Memory has probably been my greatest advantage in that you don't forget the signal graces that you've had before. You don't forget them because they're impacting to you. They're profound on you. They change you. They change what you're doing. They change your direction. They make you more aware of things. So you don't just forget them. You don't just say, oh, to move on, you don't forget that you had that other one 10 years ago. So what happens then is now you're moving on to a closer, more intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, but you remember what happened to you in those early years when you were not so intimate with Him, but He was intimate with you. He brought you. You didn't bring Him. He brought you. So how does God do this with everyone? We're forgetting the promise. Let's see. The promise that Mary gave us is, if we pray the rosary, we'll have signal graces. So will God do this to everyone? Do we have to be more holy than our neighbor or our spouse? I think God will do it for everyone. I really believe that. That's why I know that all of us are called to be saints. I know it. We just ignore this. We pay no attention to it. But it's the truth. The truth is, it's a promise that was made to us. And ignoring it leaves us in this place where we have no progress. I'm not going to go on too long today because I probably will have to have another nap before the day is over. You're going to think I'm awful. But anyway, I want you to know that all the St. Peregrine medals came in. So I have the St. Peregrine medals, and I have, I got a lot of them. So they'll be around for a while. But anybody wants a St. Peregrine, be sure you just blip me an email and it's in the mail. And I also have Consoling Heart medals. So if you need one or the other or both, I don't care. Just tell me. These things, in this situation, there is no cost to this. The only thing I ever ask for a cost to is the little prayer book. And the reason I ask for a cost on the prayer book is because I had to go out and buy all these things separately or order them, whatever, and then put them together, and then the sending them out was a big deal. I mean, they were a pain in the neck. They were a pain in the neck. but a joy to the soul. So I really believe that there's a benefit to all of us to pray as we pray in a sameness. That sameness allows us to understand what each other are saying when we use different words. It allows us to do that. So the prayer book is important for that reason. And I already know that those of you who have the prayer book, you're going to end up closer to God. You are. And you're going to end up closer to God because what happens is the rest of us are praying for you, with you. You're not praying alone. You're not praying those things alone. We are with you. And besides that, not only are we with you, but think, the church is. How many people in the church must also do the Divine Mercy? How many people in the church also do the Rosary? Well, all of that combined with these people that you know right under your nose are praying with you. So what you have is, you have the knowledge of the entire church who prays with us. We know that because the church tells us that. I mean, that just makes sense. But we also know from our little group that we support one another in that. So I'm telling you that because the book costs me more. All of these little medals and things, I get them I get them bulk. I get them the cheapest I can get them. I get them cheaper than you could ever get them. So there's no charge on those kind of things. So don't ask. One of the ladies, one of you girls asked me about, a charge, and no, there's no charge on those things. I'm going to close today. Oh, and also don't forget miraculous medals. I have gobs of those too. Anybody ever needs those, I can always see that you get those too. And those, you can't get them for the price I get them either. Yesterday we had a meeting with the little local girls. Oh, I was so lonesome. I was so painfully lonesome. It was a longing. And it was... So, I hadn't seen them in a very long time. Anyway, so we closed with a prayer, and it just turned out to be something I thought about a long time ago, and it seemed to be very fitting. So I'm going to use it again. And it's that as we believe, to believe is mentally making visible what is invisible. So whatever is invisible in our soul, to believe makes it visible. So have a wonderful day. Oh, I'm so glad to be home. So grateful to be home. In the name of the Father,